Hello students, welcome back to our class, and today's class we will see about the evaluation of intakes and diets. Diet is a major lifestyle related risk factor of a wide range of chronic diseases. Changes in dietary habits have been found to reduce cancer incidence by 1/3. Dietary information has been useful in cardiovascular disease risk prediction, and consuming a nutrient dense diet was associated with a low risk of all cause mortality. Contrary to other lifestyle risk factors like smoking, dietary exposures are very difficult to measure because all individuals eat foods, even if the amount and the kind of food consumed is various between subjects, and people rarely perceive what they eat and how much they do. Inaccurate dietary assessment may be a serious obstacle of understanding the impact of dietary factors on the disease. Specific biochemical markers have been used as a surrogate to measure the dietary intake of selected nutrients or dietary components in the epidemiological studies. These markers are found to be highly correlated with dietary intake levels, free of a social desirability bias and independent of memory, not based on subjects' ability to describe the type and quantity of food consumed. Thus, these biochemical markers may provide more accurate measures than the dietary intake estimates do. However, a number of biomarkers have been known to provide integrated measures reflecting their absorption and metabolism after consumption, and they are also affected by disease or homeostatic regulation. Thus, their values cannot be translated into the subject's absolute dietary intake. Moreover, the results based on biomarkers cannot provide dietary recommendations to modify a subject's dietary habit. Thus, direct assessment of dietary intake may be more informative than the biomarkers are. Among the available dietary assessment methods, the food frequency questionnaire has been widely used in large epidemiological studies since 1990s. After doubts of their accuracy, they were raised in the 2000s. The numerous changes to the assessment methods have been made. Some researchers have shifted their focus and concentrated their efforts to improve the feasibility and accuracy of open-ended dietary assessment methods rather than improve the food frequency questionnaire for further find relevant biomarkers. Other researchers have concentrated their efforts to enhance the accuracy of the food frequency questionnaire. Assessing dietary exposure accurately with limited resources remains a challenge for the assessors. Assessing dietary exposure accurately with limited resources again becomes a challenge. Thus, we aim to review a common method for dietary assessment and their feasibility in epidemiological studies. Dietary assessment by objective observation. So, in the table 1 which is given below, the available dietary assessment methods including the methods of collecting data, strengths and limitations considering the conservative approach is given. So, dietary intake can be assessed by objective observation using a duplicate diet approach or food consumption record by a trained research staff. The duplicate diet method collects duplicate samples of a subject's normal diet, then analyzes it to estimate the potential dietary exposures. This method has been mainly used to measure exposure to environmental contaminants such as phthalates and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and in foods and beverages. Food consumption record collects dietary information on subjects' food preparation and consumption in their home with the objective observation of skilled field workers. This method is useful in developing countries, especially among those with low literacy rate and those who prepare a substantial portion of their food at home. In South Korea, the National Nutrition surveyed households by this direct method to monitor national food consumption from 1969 to 1995. So, they had well trained staff who observed and recorded all the foods prepared and consumed in the surveyed household for 2 consecutive days. All the data were collected at the household level. Therefore, no information on how foods were consumed by each individual within the household or about the foods consumed outside the home were collected. Thus, each individual's consumption was indirectly estimated using the data on the number, age and sex of the residents in the household sharing the recorded food. With improvement in economic status, increase in eating out and advancement in the individual dietary assessment techniques, the assessment of individual level has become widespread in nutritional epidemiological studies. So, dietary assessment methods in the epidemiological studies show that the collection of duplicate diet sample on direct analysis showed objective observation on trained staff at the household level, and in the 24-hour dietary recall, which is a subjective measure using open ended questionnaire as administered by the trained interviewer, and the dietary record again is a subjective measure using open ended self administered questionnaire. That means, the subject himself fills the questionnaire, and in the dietary history subjective measures using open ended and close ended questionnaire administered by the trained interviewer, and there is a food frequency questionnaire, again a subjective measure using predefined self or interviewer administered questionnaire. So, the collected data is again the actual intake information throughout this specific period, and the same in all the types of surveys except in the food frequency method, where it shows that the usual intake estimates over a relative long period, that is for 6 months or 1 year. Then the strength of these methods show that the measurement of dietary exposures, then there is ease of application among the subjects and provides detailed intake data and assesses usual dietary assessment of usual dietary foods. Then the possible environmental contaminants also can be seen from these questionnaires, and limitations regarding the various method is some methods are not suitable for large scale studies, whereas 24-hour recall method is individual dairy consumption, does not give an accurate picture, not suitable among those who frequently eat outside. And when you see the frequently questionnaire, you find that specific to the study groups and research aims uses at a closest ended questionnaire with low accuracy. Now, dietary assessment by subjective report. Subject is given subjective dietary assessment method that assesses the individual's intake and include the 24-hour dietary recall, dietary record, dietary history and food frequency questionnaire. The data are collected with the help of trained interviewer or by self report. So, coming to the 24-hour dietary recall and dietary record, which are conservative approach, the 24-hour and the direct record are completely open-ended surveys. They collect a variety of detailed information about food consumed over a specific period. The 24-hour is conducted in an in-depth interview manner and typically requires about 20 to 30 minutes to complete a single day recall. Now, detailed data about the food preparation methods, ingredients used, and mixed dishes, brand name, commercial products may be required according to the research question. The amounts of each food consumed are estimated in reference to a common size containers like bowls, cups or glasses. So, these standard measuring cups or spoons, a 3-dimensional food model or a 2-dimensional aid such as photographs. One advantage of 24-hour is that it is a relatively minimum burden imposed on the respondents. Inevitable limitation is all the information depends upon the respondent's memory and skills of the well-trained interview and get the maximum amount of the information. Conversely, the direct dietary record collects data by subjects self-record at the time of foods that are eaten, therefore, minimizes reliance on the subject's memory. So, to obtain accurate data, however, the subjects should be trained before participating in the survey. Therefore, a high level of motivation is required and relatively large burden is passed on to the respondents. So, both methods have few common strengths. Both use open-ended questions so that abundant information can be collected and analyzed. In addition, both methods can easily be applied to diverse groups with a wide range of eating habits and may be used to estimate the average intake of certain population. And in many countries, the 24-hour is most commonly used in national surveys because it takes a very less time and large population can be covered. And both methods are also frequently applied to randomized clinical trials and cohort studies. However, these methods have limitations when used to study chronic diseases and major public health concern. One limitation is that both methods are mainly focused on short-term intake, but long-term dietary exposure is especially of interest when investigating for chronic diseases. Thus, to measure average intake, multiple 24 hours or dietary records are needed. Repeated measurement not only requires lot of resources and time, but survey repetition can also influence a respondent's diet. Some respondents may improve their dietary habits unintentionally through self-reflection. However, some respondents may alter their diet intentionally to avoid a burden of responses and even choose not to report the actual intake. Another limitation spawns from the open-ended format that requires considerable efforts in the course of the data collection, entry and analysis. Each questionnaire requires careful review by the research staff to ensure that all the reported data are included. After initial review, all foods and mixed dishes consumed according to the detailed descriptions of the respondent should be matched and coded with the most appropriate food listed in the food composition database. Moreover, the quantity of food consumed should be converted to its actual weights. When the reported information is changed to the corresponding food code and weight, actual intakes can be calculated. These processes tend to be time consuming, laborious and highly expensive to implement. Now, 24-hour dietary recall and dietary record with newer technologies have been developed based on the limitations, and multiple 24 hours and DRs have inherent strengths in etiologic studies of chronic diseases. First, both methods collect actual intake on specific days. Second, the burden of memory may be less for these methods than that for the food frequency questionnaire, which requires recall over a long period, for example, the previous 12 months. And last, usual intake can also be estimated if repeated. Owing to these trends, innovative technologies focusing on reducing the respondent's burden, improving accuracy and making multiple self-administrations possible have been recently incorporated to improve their feasibility in the epidemiological studies. Although many techniques were still under development, major advances have been made. Interactive computer based technologies, which were introduced relatively early in dietary assessment method and aim to be a comprehensive system for data collection, coding, entry and calculation of intakes. For this, the example includes the automated multiple pass method for administering 24-hour in the US National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. A menu that is driven standardized 24-hour program in the European prospective investigation into cancer and nutrition study that allows interviewers to collect, probe and identify reported intake in a standardized manner, thus improving the accuracy of data even if they are used in the diverse population. Having limitations in time, location and number of interviewers available for each study, these technologies remain relatively costly for the implementation on a large scale in the epidemiological studies. Considerably overlapped with the computer based approach, web based technology enables research to collect the data regardless of time and location, assuming internet access available. Recently, the National Cancer Institute in US has developed an internet based technique called automated self administered 24-hour that is based on the AM/PM approach. This internet based technique includes an online tutorial, digital images for food identification and portion size estimation and various audio files. Thus, those with low literacy can easily complete the survey and researchers can collect real time data. Other internet based technologies designed for face to face standardized interview administration have been developed, such as diet evaluation system that was developed in South Korea. In addition, mobile phone applications that allow users to enter dietary intake data has been released. Subjects can manually record their diet by choosing corresponding items from a predefined list of foods and beverages, and the quantity of food consumed can be recorded by selecting from predefined portion sizes. In South Korea, Smart Diet is an application that was developed for dietary management and education, and this application have been evaluated for their effectiveness and feasibility in clinical settings. Multiple functions embedded in the mobile device can be used to collect the data. Whereas in Japan, the mobile phone application called WellNavi uses the subject's camera and mobile phone card to report everything that was consumed by sending images before and after eating to study dietitian. In addition, voice recording such as spoken diet records has been used to collect data. In Australia, the NutriCam allows subjects to capture an image of foods and drinks before consumption and verbally describe the items in the image. Then the subjects upload both the image and voice file to the website for analysis. Recently, wearable device that resembles a necklace includes a camera, microphone and several other sensors has been introduced. This technology uses the video recording to collect the dietary information, and the software identifies the eating episode, estimates the amount consumed in the video file, then final dietary intakes are calculated automatically. This method is likely to minimize the burden of the subjects using objective observation. However, the technology is still in the experimental stage for using in researches. Most state of art technologies must give enormous potential to be adapted as major dietary assessment tool in various epidemiological studies, conservative open-ended methods and depending upon the paper and pencil service. So, we have another table which summarizes the strength and limitations of dietary assessment methods with newer techniques. Software development and required hardware needs high cost in the early stage of the research. However, only if they are prepared, dietary records and 24 hours with innovative technologies may reduce their cost and also the resources for organizing the study as well as the collecting and handling data, improving the consistency of data, collect data in real time and calculate dietary intakes automatically, and this allows the respondents to focus on dietary assessment. While the feasibility of multiple 24 hours and direct records in epidemiological studies has considerably improved with the help of these new technologies, again there are certain limitations. First, these methods may be difficult to apply to certain populations who are familiar with innovative technologies and new devices. Training the subjects how to use these technologies and use a computer including accessing the internet is also required. Furthermore, the technical problems in data transfer, storage, battery life and other concerns must be improved. Most importantly, these new methods do not seem to overcome methodological problems related to self-report. So, a previous report found that subjects still had difficulties in recalling and reporting their diet. Underreported in repeated assessment and altered food intake knew that the survey date is in advance. For all these reasons, open-ended methods with new technologies have not yet been widely implemented as a primary assessment tool in the epidemiological studies. So, the strengths and limitations of new techniques are required are the strengths are standardized data collection is possible and real time data collection is possible, able to collect information and accurate data is available and complex data also can be collected. And limitations are inherent bias related to self report, inherent bias related to the participant training is required so that they know how to use the technology, and measurement errors related to methodology remain the same. Now, dietary history. To assess the individual long term dietary intake, Burke developed a dietary history method in 1947. This method requires that subjects complete 24-hour, 3-day food diary and checklist of food usually consumed. Highly skilled professionals are required to collect the information on the participants' usual diet using an in-depth interview. So, it takes approximately 90 minutes to complete this interview. Thus, this method is rarely used in the epidemiological studies. So, food frequency questionnaire in advance form of the checklist in dietary history method and ask respondents how often and how much food they ate over a specific period. Presenting about 100 to 150 foods, this questionnaire takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete and can be self-administered or collected via an interview. This method enables the assessment of long-term dietary intakes in a relatively simple, cost-effective and time-efficient manner. Thus, various food frequency questionnaires have been widely employed as a practical instrument since 1990s. Food frequency should be developed specifically for each study group and research purposes because diet may be influenced by ethnicity, culture and individual preference, economic status, etc. So, based on the situation and the type of result that is required, the food frequency questionnaire has to be developed in a specific manner. And in South Korea, the first food frequency questionnaire was developed through the modification of the food frequency questionnaires that were used in Western countries to meet the Korean diet characteristics. So, after some food frequency questionnaires were developed, following the opinion of experienced dietitians and epidemiologists, based on the nutrient contents in Korean food and the results of the previous studies, again the frequency questionnaires were developed. So, the recent food frequency questionnaires have been developed in more sophisticated way using actual dietary data collected by open-ended surveys. Among the various foods consumed by the subjects, informative foods are selected according to the extent to which the foods contribute specific nutrient intakes or the extent that the foods explained between person variations. Then the selected foods are grouped by their nutritional content or cooking methods and finally presented in a close-ended format. So, according to the interests of the researchers, the food frequency questionnaires may focus on the intake of specific nutrients, dietary exposures related to certain disease or comprehensively assess the various nutrients. So, in prospective studies, the comprehensive assessment is generally recommended because it enables us to assess any dietary components which were not important at the beginning of the study, but might emerge as an important factor later. So, comprehensive assessment also enables us to estimate the intakes of various dietary components that might act as a confounder in the relation to the key dietary factor and diseases, which allows statistical adjustment. According to the way in which the informative foods present in food frequency questionnaires, food based frequency questionnaires such as Harvard Food Frequency Questionnaire, dish based FFQs have been developed. So, Korean and Asian food mainly contains many mixed diet. They are cooked with individual ingredient foods, seasonings and cooking oils. Thus, the food based food frequency questionnaires may raise subjects' burden and increase the response error when their subjects do not typically cook their food or are unaware of the ingredients. Moreover, the food based food frequency questionnaire tends to underestimate the dietary intake more than the dish based FFQs because various seasonings are added like salt, soy sauce, red pepper paste, soybean paste, etc. and cooking oils which are highly contributing to the nutrients like energy, fat, sodium, beta carotene, etc. Now, intakes are not considered in the dietary intake calculation because these are added in small amounts. Therefore, dish based approach has been recommended as a new strategy to improve dietary assessment in countries with an Asian diet. Average consumption frequency can be assessed using open ended questions, but most food frequency questionnaires collected data across the 9 possible responses from never to 3 or more times a day. Various answer choices have been used to improve data quality and reduce the burden on the subjects. So, for the foods eaten seasonally, subjects are typically asked how frequently and over what duration they ate the seasonal food. Of the frequently consumed foods such as coffee, answers are collected directly as an open-ended question in some food frequency questionnaires. And the utility of the questions in FFQs about portion size has been controversial. Some researchers reported that between person variations in portion size were not important because that variation tends to be smaller than the variation in frequency of consumption. In South Korea, however, data on portion size of some foods seem to be important, such as cooked rice, because between person variations might be highly explained by the portion size rather than the frequency. So, until now, the semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaires collecting data on the average portion sizes in a closed format have been widely used in all the epidemiological studies. Then has been a simple FFQ, which solely asks about the frequency, or quantitative FFQs, which queries about amount of food consumption using completely open-ended questions respectively. Food frequency questionnaires, which use a closed format, should be evaluated for their accuracy before being used as a dietary assessment tool in the studies. So, a correlation coefficient ranging from 0.5 to 0.7 is considered to be moderate. However, most of the FFQs from Asian countries, including South Korea, tend to have correlation coefficients ranging between 0.3 to 0.5, which is much lower than the Western countries. And some researchers questioned the value of using these FFQs in epidemiological studies, and this topic continues to be highly debated. In addition, concentrated efforts to assess usual dietary intakes accurately using FFQs as well as multiple 24 hours or direct dietary records have been made. Newer techniques introduced FFQs that can be optically scanned, perform complex skip algorithms and probe multiple details, and range checks, as well as allows for the presentation of pictures of food for ease of reporting portion sizes. All these efforts improve the quality of dietary data and enhance our capability to collect complex information. Now, dietary intake is difficult to measure, and any single method cannot assess the dietary exposure perfectly. Nutritional biomarkers are valid for objective estimates of dietary exposures in anthropometric and clinical assessment, while the 24-hour and dietary record, dietary history and food frequency questionnaires are subjective estimates. Numerous efforts have been made progress in the accuracy of dietary intake assessment. Thus, the feasibility of open-ended methods with various innovative technologies in the epidemiological studies has been substantially enhanced. However, new methods need higher costs than the food frequencies, and intrinsic problems with relate to the self-report remain unsolved. Notwithstanding the discussed limitations, food frequency questionnaires are still widely used as primary dietary assessment tool in epidemiological studies. Now, recently it has been suggested that a combination of methods like FFQ with dietary records or 24-hour or food frequency questionnaire with a biomarker level should be used to obtain more accurate estimation of dietary intake than that of individual methods. So, considerable efforts to improve the accuracy and feasibility of large epidemiological studies are still ongoing. So, in summary, the dietary assessment methods should be selected with caution while considering the research objective, hypothesis, design and available resources to estimate the actual intake of diet and assess their intake in any country. Thank you.